Welcome to the Open to Hope show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation in partnership with the Compassionate Friends and the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. Well, Heidi, we've got some wonderful guests today.
We do. I'm excited for the show.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about trauma and healing and creative activities, and we have got an expert here on trauma and a woman who is very involved with creative activities. Heidi, you want to tell us about our guests?
Sure. Our first guest today is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Bessel is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Boston University Medical School. He is the founder and medical director of the Trauma Center in Brookline, Massachusetts, and he is the director of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. He is the author of the groundbreaking New York Times best-selling book, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. Welcome to our show, Bessel.
Good afternoon.
It's great to have you on, and I'm so excited because I just thought your book was so brilliant, The Body Keeps Score. And your publisher sent it to me, and you know I'm in the field of grief and loss, and this is a little bit more about trauma after spousal abuse or children or whatever, but it's got so many great things to help with the area of grief and loss. I really am inspired by it. I know I felt such trauma when my son was killed 30 years ago, and your brother.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just, you get a telephone call, they're dead, and it's like you're falling on the floor, you're screaming.
And your heart breaks,
Yeah.
and your gut wrenches. It is a deeply somatic, physical response.
And people don't realize that.
Yeah,
They talk
yeah.
so much about the head-based.
Yeah. Your body just collapses.
Yeah.
So,
you don't want to
Bessel,
move.
I know you wrote this book, The Body Keeps the Score. What does that mean?
Well, it actually comes from a patient of mine
Okay.
who talked about her childhood abuse. And she said, you know, my head went into the clouds, and I could pretend like nothing had happened. But she said, my body always kept the score, and I kept getting freaked out and upset and felt these horrible sensations in my body. And, you know, that stayed with me forever, because you can try to deny it, and you can push it away, you can talk to you till the car comes home, but it's that body that plays out in the theater of the body, as we like to say it. And not until you're ready to be here again, and to be fully alive right now, and have a body that moves and lives right now, you're not better.
Well, and I like what you say, because, you know, when you have a sudden death and or trauma, it is a psychological, emotional, and physical assault to the system. And I like what you say, because when we think about it, we keep reliving it over and over and over.
Right.
And talk about how does that happen with the body?
Well, the reason why people probably relive it is that there is something in our very primitive survival brain that says, pay attention, something happened, and you have to cope with this. So it starts off as an adaptive way of dealing with something, and you need to really rearrange your life and see what this means to you, and to, you know, to make new connections in your family. And so I think we have these mechanisms in our brain for a reason. And then sometimes you get stuck. When it's too horrifying, you don't get stuck because you want to get stuck. You get stuck because the systems of healing are not working. And so it's really very important for us to understand the system of healings. Healing, which is about what gets in the way. What gets in the way is you're too horrified, you feel too helpless, you don't get the community, the support you get, there's secrets involved, there's stuff that's unresolved, and it's the system, a very primitive survival system in your brain, so it keeps reminding you it's not over yet.
Yeah, and talk about how you relive it, because I know so many people are reliving it even years later. They can't, what do they say, I can't go there, or somebody will say to you, well, you know what, you never get over it, which really.
And so the issue is not, people they think they remember, but in fact, instead of remembering, they relive it. And so the great challenge is to make it a memory of, yes, my kid died. And it was a great, terrible tragedy, and it was 10 years ago, or 30 years ago, and now I realized that it was really good having this child, and now I've gone on with my life, in part in honor of that child, but my child would not have wanted me to be, stop my life for.
I love that piece, don't you?
I love it too, because they would want us to live fully. My brother would want me to live fully in the now and celebrate his life. And I know that, I know a lot of my clients and myself know that on an intellectual level, but sometimes it's hard to get there. And I'm wondering how you get to that place and start to do that.
See, your body doesn't know that. So
Okay.
these cognitive things of, oh, you should feel that way, you should get over it, they don't go into it, and not until your body finds peace. And that is, these are things that, to much to my surprise in a way, people don't get taught in school and other places. You get back into the room by feeling your bum sitting on the chair,
Oh, interesting.
by noticing your breath, and just noticing the life of your organism. To once again open yourself up for touch of another human being, and to feel what it feels like when people touch your hand. Oh, thank you. That feels like I'm being supported. And so you need to really pay attention to your sensory life and say, I'm alive. Know my life, I'm alive by breathing. And as you change your breathing and your breathing becomes calmer, your mind can become calmer. And this is really one of the tragedies of our culture, is that we don't teach people in our culture that we have inborn mechanisms to regain ownership of ourselves, basically. And it has to do with the body.
Well, talk a little bit about art and being able to, or theater, or whatever comes up for you with art, how maybe that's what makes some people have to go there before they can go into the body again.
See, I'm not sure about it, but we can discuss it with the next person. I think getting into having a body that can be present is very important. The second piece is opening up your imagination. What we know, and we understand the neurobiology of it, is that when you get traumatized, your imagination stops.
Oh, wow.
And everything goes there. It's like somebody said, it's like rain going down a rain spout. All the raindrops come on the roof, and they always
I always called it a big dark hole. Everything that happened for the day went into the hole.
And so the issue is that you need to open up your imagination. And there's many ways of opening up your imagination, but first of all, you start looking at it and being able to see it. How was it, and what else could be there, and start adding things into that picture in your mind or in reality. But the opening up of imagination is critical, because we live by our imaginations. We can only sit here, for example, because I know that in a little while the show is going to be over and I'm going to have dinner. So knowing that something else is going to happen makes the present enjoyable. If this would last forever, we'd all be miserable.
Right.
Well, we won't want to sit here 10 years from now in the same chair. You know? And so when you're traumatized, you live in that same traumatizing present all the time. So you need to open up the capacity to see other things besides right now, and imagine what tomorrow will look like, and open up what happened yesterday, and see what else happened. So you need to expand your mind and expand the parts of your brain that have to do with imagination and possibility.
I like this, the possibility that eventually you won't be in this agony that oftentimes you're in.
And so you need to open that up in whatever way you can. You can open it up by helping the body to become calm and safe. You know, when somebody really embraces you, you can allow yourself to feel that embrace. You can say, I'm here right now and I'm being embraced. And when you, like one of my favorite imagination techniques is theater. And to play the role of somebody else. Let's say you're bereaved and you play the role of a conqueror, or you play the role of a betrayed friend, or you play a general. And then you need to feel in your body again what it feels like to be somebody other than the person who you become all the time. So incessantly you get into that state of frozen grief. And you need to do things to feel that your body can adopt different configurations in the way almost.
And there are theater groups in neighborhoods, right? In cities and things that people could get into improv. I know I read that you had done a little improv, right?
No, we do a lot of theater in our clinic in Boston. And I see theater groups all around the country. You need to find them. But there's theater programs in jails, and there's a theater program for juvenile delinquents in Berkshire County, where you can get condemned by the judge to go become a Shakespearean actor. Probably helps a hell of a lot better than jail. And so for people to, again, feel what it feels like to be somebody other than the grief-stricken person that you are, or the frightened person that you are, or the person who saw his best friend killed, and to really begin to imagine again other ways of being in your body.
That can be really empowering, and I also think it's a good way to get out your emotions in an adaptive place, you know, becoming the rageful person, or becoming the sad person, or becoming the hopeful person.
And it's very important that in our culture, we don't grieve openly.
Right.
And so you need to be able to let it out. And every part of it should be acceptable. And oftentimes people hold back certain pieces. And so somewhere, the forbidden things, maybe the anger with the person who died, maybe the feeling of abandonment, and anger because of that, need to come out.
Well, we've got a next guest,
Right.
Sharon
and I need to
Strauss,
introduce her.
who's going to come and talk to us about some of the things she does, the creative art things, and that's going to be really interesting.
And
Let's welcome Sharon.
Yes.
You want to talk about Sharon? Introduce her.
Sure, I guess we should welcome her because,
Yeah.
yes. Sharon Strauss is a board-certified art therapist and author of Artful Grief, A Diary of Healing, and her daughter Kristen died by suicide in 2001. She's been at my class at Columbia. She does fabulous work, and she speaks all over the country on how to heal yourself and how to use art as that medium. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you
Hello.
so much for having me.
Hi, Sharon. It's great to have you on. And I think, Bessel, you've got a piece of her work sitting by you. If you want
Yes,
to
I do.
hand it over. So you want to talk a little bit about your collage and your work, and tell us
Sure.
about your daughter first. So.
Well, Kristen died October 11th of 2001, and she was 17. She was actually here in New York when she died.
She was in art school, right?
She was in art school, Parsons School, of
Oh,
design.
fabulous school.
Yeah. So she was an artist, but and I was an art therapist also
Wow.
before she died. I became a different kind of art therapist after she died. And it really didn't occur to me to start to do my own artwork until about a year later. I was in traditional therapy and you know, with a psychiatrist and survivors of suicide groups, but I really felt like something was missing in my healing process, and it wasn't until that one evening when a little voice said, "Why don't you make a collage?" And I listened, and this was the first piece that I made.
And tell people how you went about that.
You know, magazines were just sitting there, you know, on the kitchen counter, and it was just, can I be in the moment? I had a very strong meditative practice, and I think that really served me. And, you know, I just started by saying, what am I feeling now? You know, to be present to that. And then I just let go. And I started opening up the pages and looking. And what moved me, what I felt in my body, you know, I let that guide me. And I just started tearing pages out. And lo and behold, my mind started to calm down.
And this is what you came up with, right?
And this is what I came up with.
That's powerful.
And really, this was a template of the work that I would do really over the next 10 years, in fact, investigating different aspects of myself. You know, who did I feel like at that moment, a year after Kristen's death, you know, naked, stripped to the bone, you know, nothing really left of me. You know, and this is the trauma that's in the body at that moment.
I love it where it says, caution, do not leave unattended.
Exactly. I could be playful. I could imagine also myself with Kristen. I wasn't with her in that moment, but I could imagine myself with her. And I think, you know, you said imagination is such an important piece to bring back those fractured pieces. And I know so many suicide survivors, you know, mothers who have, you know, found their children. You know, this is severe trauma, and they need to work through those fragmented pieces. So here I began to play in that.
Wow.
But the paradox is really that my mind was completely still for the first time. There was none of the racing thoughts. I knew I was also in my body instead of somewhere energetically out here. And yet, look what I was doing.
And I bet
was
there's things
in
you
it.
learned about yourself that you weren't aware of.
Well, this was the beginning of, you know, a wonderful investigation, so that over time, I could see that I was healing. You know, the transformation that occurred within my own self-concept was amazing. And, you know, to be able to look at that when 2 years down the road, you're like, am I sure that I'm changing? You can go to this and go, wow, I can see that I'm changing. So Yeah, this was my beginning.
That's great.
Well, Heidi, you had an experience with her. Talk about
I
that
did.
a little bit.
I guess what I wanted to tell our audience is that, you know, you don't need to be an artist to do this.
Exactly.
And I was at first, when I brought Sharon into my class at Columbia, I was really resistant because I thought, I don't want to do this. I'll let my students do it. She said, Heidi, just try it. And I thought, what am I going to learn about myself 30 years later? And so she just said, just randomly pull things out of these magazines
Let
and
your
stay very
let
present.
your body
Guide you, right?
Right, exactly.
And I did. I let go. I like to be very controlled, but I let go.
Yeah.
And I did learn a lot. And one of the major things I learned that I didn't know was that I felt, because my brother and cousin died together in an accident, and my cousin was driving. They were both 17. Because my cousin Matthew died, I felt like I had no right to be angry with him. And I didn't realize that piece
It came up
until it came out.
spontaneously in the collage
And
because it taps into the unconscious, and the creative process makes it possible for all that to come up.
So people can just get their magazines around the house right now, take a pair of scissors, get some glue,
and this is what
and play with it no matter where you are in the process, and you can
Exactly.
put it away if you don't want to look at it anymore, and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
amazing. We'll talk about the masks, because Heidi told me
Yeah.
about TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for the military, that you did some work, and Heidi works with them, and talk about what you did. She was very impressed.
we did mask making, and this isn't the plastic masks that you can get at Michael's, but this is actually putting casting material on the face. And so the whole process of doing this with people, asking them to surrender, to lay on the floor, to allow somebody to touch you, to have your face covered, your eyes, your nose, there's such a degree of trust that has to happen in that process. So that,
And all the touching, too.
Yes, exactly. And then, the actual masks, once they're taken off, is it just a powerful experience when that person sits up and bends over and removes that mask, and everything that they feel around that, the inside of the mask. What's on the inside? What do you show, to the world, and is that different? So it's a rich experience, from start to finish.
Wonderful. Now you have some group things that you do too, right?
I do.
And talk about those a bit.
Well, I, have groups for bereaved mothers, fathers. I have some men in the group. That's always wonderful. And, as well as some, that people that just want to work on themselves. It's a wonderful modality. And, we really start just by quieting, some breathing. What are you feeling now? And then just allowing the process, to be curious, to be willing. You're showing up and being willing. And they have about an hour that they create. And then really the talking about the images is so rich.
And I love what you're starting to do, because you do a lot of presenting all over the country, and you're starting to set up these rooms all day at conferences.
Yes.
Where people that are grieving or are professionals can go in and do this artwork while they're there.
And really it was TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, and now also Compassionate Friends. And what they're having is an all-day studio. We're open the entire weekend, 9 to 5.
In July,
In July, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I think what they've realized is that this is not a 90-minute workshop.
Right.
That, the participants can come in, and often they want to be there more than that hour. They come in and they get into a process, and this gives them the opportunity to really go deeply. And I think that we're allowing that, and making a safe, it becomes a safe environment for them to come in and explore themselves.
Could you talk a little bit about suicide? Because, I mean, this is so horrendous to have your daughter jump off a building and die by suicide. I mean, it is huge.
Well,
Huge.
the trauma
and,
of it.
the trauma of it, and to see you in this space,
Well, I think it's important for survivors to be vocal and to tell their story, and Doug and I have not shied away from that, and I think that that's really important, and to educate those and to realize that it is, many times these are treatable mental illnesses, but there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of stigma, around mental illness, and I think families get caught and confused, and they don't know where to go and what to do. And so I encourage survivors to be out there and educate themselves, and not to be afraid.
And I think Compassionate Friends groups, when we have suicidal families come in, I really like it because it's an opportunity for them to tell us whose kids didn't do by suicide, that their kid died by suicide, and I mean, when you get there, it really doesn't matter. We miss them like heck.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the main thing. It's not how they died, it's how they lived.
yes, exactly.
You know, becomes the factor. So Bessel, I wanted to include you in this and have you talk about what you know, your thoughts about Sharon, what she's doing, and
Well,
any
my
ideas?
first reaction is that, you know, people don't remember these tragedies in words.
Exactly.
The memory is in terms of body sensations and in terms of images. Right? Our memory of 9/11. We see people jumping off out of the World Trade Center. We see
Yeah.
people running down the street. It's not like a story about what happened. It's that, oh my God. And so what you see, and it's other sensations. And I think this process is beautiful because here you go through magazines and you just put stuff in there. You don't know how it happens.
Right,
And then
until
you see something emerge and you're surprised, right?
Yes,
Yes.
you're
Like,
surprised.
wow.
You
Very
look
much.
at it. Yes. Well, it gets to what you couldn't, you can't talk about,
Right.
and that's what I realized. You know, in the talking groups, there was a lot of the trauma that nobody, you just were not going to talk about. But it showed up very clearly in my collage work,
Yeah.
and then released me so that I could talk about it.
In all my work, I say the story comes at the very end.
Yes.
And at the very end, you can sort of tell a completed story. But before that, you know, our brains can't show that when people are in the middle of it, their verbal part of their brain shuts down a good amount of the time. And the closer they get to it, the more dumbfounded they become. And when somebody suicides, you're dumbfounded. You want to talk about it all the time. At the same time, there are no words that really can measure what really happened.
That makes sense. I mean, how do you describe what it means to lose the brother you thought was going to be in your
Right.
life forever, or
Right.
to be bearing a child?
Right.
I mean, it transcends words.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we have to address those parts and pieces. We have to find a way for those fragments
Yeah.
to release them
Absolutely.
because we carry them inside
Yeah,
our bodies.
absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and often we're dealing with what the cover
Yeah.
story is.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. You know, I read that in your book that we're about the cover story often, and it's like what's underneath that
Yeah.
story.
And part of creativity is being surprised.
Yeah.
And part of being alive is being surprised. So like, oh, what's that elephant doing that thing? And suddenly you go, oh, that's what it means for me.
Right.
But to be surprised by your internal world is really opening yourself up again to, oh, I'm alive. I'm
Yes.
a person who still makes things happen in
Right.
certain
And that's
circumstances.
part of the beauty of the creative process because the trauma sits side by side with the formal elements of creativity. You know, the beauty of the color, the line, the form also holds the space. The paper holds the space. But that's the way our life is. You know, the joys and the sorrows sit side by side.
I would call it, you know, it's part of the creating symbols. You know, we live by symbols, and so we just created this new memorial for 9/11. And you go there, I say, there it is, and it's there, and it captures something in time. And when you make a collage like this, there it is. It's not all inside of me.
It's
there.
outside.
There's a defined event. It really happens. It's horrible, but I'm here, and today is a different day. So you get
There's
a
some
I like
distance.
sense of time.
I am not this event.
Yes.
Nice. Well, I want to say one thing. We do pay a price. I mean, when we're talking now, the body does keep score physically too.
Absolutely.
And if we don't do some of these methods, if we don't try some of
Yep.
these things, if we don't listen, we are risking health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very clear. That people who don't deal with their trauma have a much greater chance of becoming ill, of becoming drug addicted, of being on long-term psychiatric medications, die earlier. I mean, these are very serious. These are very serious things. When people talk about breaking a leg or losing a limb, but this is like losing a limb.
Yeah,
Except you cannot see it.
Yeah, sometimes people think it's peripheral. Well, I really don't need to, you know, do that kind
Yeah.
of thing, you know, and they do. I mean, it will take a price on your own
Well,
health.
people don't want to go there because it's so horrendous.
Yeah.
And so when you say just go do it by yourself, yes, you can do it by yourself, but being with other people helps a lot.
Community.
You know,
Yeah.
that sense of I'm not alone in this, and somebody who, when you break down, can hug you and pat you and be there for you. I think it's an important part of this. And so this, for most people, this is not a lonely enterprise.
Yeah.
Because part of it, what happens with these tragedies is that you feel so lonely Because you know your friends hear your story and they're sympathetic with you, but they don't want to hear about it a month later and a year
Right.
later. You still have nothing else in your mind,
Right.
Yeah.
and your friends sort of go their own way. The life goes
Right.
on.
Well, we
Right.
want to thank you for being on our show today and being part of this community, and we want to thank everyone for watching, because it is important to be in community, and we want you to not be alone, and thank you too for being on the show.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for the work
Thank
you're doing.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this show today. I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley with Dr. Heidi Horsley, and we want to remind you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.